But what's your takeaways from this?
As I said earlier, I think this is one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen, but I also don't mean it in a bad way because I was entertained. You know, while it's certainly not a movie to make you think, I like that they do the thing with Ed Harris where he's not completely just an evil bastard. Mm-hmm. Tony Todd's kind of an evil bastard, which, you know, Tony Todd in real life, or not in real life, but in all of his other movies, I guess it fits. He's probably a wonderful man. I don't know, but... And, you know, like he's definitely got some underlings that are just evil. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he's trying to de-escalate. He doesn't want to... He feels bad that they had to kill all these guys. And he also doesn't really want to fire the rockets. But he was also... And this is just like a movie thing. Like, I guess he was just dumb enough to believe the American government would actually give him the money.
Yeah.
I like it. I think my favorite scene is probably the car chase. Just the sheer amount of dumb explosions. And it looks so much better... because it's on the streets of San Francisco, which are unusually steep, and you get some fun, just action stuff there, and obviously the streetcar. You know, all the gun action, none of it's spectacular, but, you know, it's fun, and I like the Nick Cage Connery dynamic. I like their little back and forth. I think it gets a little repetitive towards the end because I think because as you were pointing out, there's basically 2 times Sean Connery leaves and then he obviously comes back each time. You think they should have like had this moment where like Connery doesn't want anything to do with them and then Nick Cage saves his life in the Donkey Kong minecart chase. And then they should probably be good from there on out, and they're still not. Like, we still have the kind of backtracking later on. But I like those 2 actors together. I think they're a lot of fun. Connery's definitely my favorite actor in the movie, not because it's a great performance, but just he's fun. I like the interrogation scene with the 2 of them, too. I like, you know, he's like, we got to get you a haircut. Because at the time, Connery has this really long hair. And he's like, why, am I out of style? And he's like, well, not if you're in one of those, like, grunge bands in Seattle. And then... Which, by the way, in 96, I think that's an out-of-date reference in 96. I could be probably wrong, but... And then so later on, when he's getting the haircut from the gay stylist, he's like, ooh, they've done a number on you. And he's like, it's a grunge thing. So there's, I don't know. Connery is just really fun in this movie. And I think that's...
I also love...
That's probably what you're going to say, because you're just you're a Connery nut.
I am. But... I love Sean Connery. I used to have a photo of him up above my desk, but I threw it out recently, unfortunately.
Too many stains on it.
Exactly. How'd you know? But no, I also love how angry he gets in this movie at people. And by angry, I mean, I like how much he swears at people in this movie. He's calling people like fucking assholes and pieces of shit. Yeah, because
how many rated R Sean Connery movies have you seen? Not too many, because, you know, when he was a younger man, obviously, they didn't swear in movies like that. And then, like, Indiana Jones, and, you know, it's PG-13. Yeah, I haven't seen him in too many R-rated movies, so I agree. That was kind of fun. And, you know, we all know Scots people love swearing, so it's, you know, it's only fitting.
Yeah.
Or, excuse me, English people.
Yes, English people. Yes, let's not get them confused. I'm not going to say it's a fantastic action movie. I think it's exciting.
Sure.
I might even call it exhilarating in some scenes.
Yeah.
It is a big, dumb, loud action movie, like I said at the beginning of this.
Sure.
It's just fun to watch.
There's a time and a place for big, dumb action movies. I'm not above it. You're not above it.
Yeah.
Nobody should be above it if it's done well enough and it has good enough actors and stuff. And I think this movie pulls that off.
Yeah. Now, is the action great in this movie? Not all the time, but the actors are great. No. You know, the story is fun. The setting is very fun. Dilapidated Alcatraz.
Yeah, that goes a long way. It really does. Also, Cage, nothing amazing, but he has some good, weird line deliveries there, where if you're like a big Nick Cage fan, you'll get something out of his performance here, definitely. Yeah. Well, if you enjoy the weird Nick Cage, this is far from the weirdest Nick Cage performance. Not even as out there as Face Off, obviously, but, you know, he still gives you a little bit there.
Yeah. But no, I love this movie. I think it's a fun movie to watch. This movie also is kind of like the last of an era for action movies. It's stupid, full of explosions, full of ridiculous weapons. Yeah, like...
Oh, ridiculous weapon, just the bombs. I mean, the guns, they're not using, like...
No, yeah, you're
guns
right.
from Doom or anything like that, you know?
The weapon of mass destruction is stupid. You know, it looks
sure.
It looks
and it's
wonky.
Straight out of a Bond movie, to be perfectly honest.
It is, yeah. And I feel like you don't really get action movies like this anymore, or you haven't for like at least the last 10-15 years. Now it's all Marvel shit, you know?
Yeah, but it's Marvel or it's Mission Impossible. There's not much of a middle ground.
But this
every 3 or 4 years we'll get a James Bond movie. And otherwise it's Marvel and Tom Cruise.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But this one we had two greats, Sean Connery and Nick Cage, and other greats all thrown into the mix. And
yeah, I like the bridging of the eras, and this is really that's what Last Crusade is kind of all about, is how can we have Indiana Jones interact with an elderly James Bond, and that's largely the appeal of that movie. But at the same time, elderly James Bond, he's a comedy character in that he doesn't really do a lot of action scenes. He unfolds an umbrella and scares some seagulls into a plane. That's kind of like his big action scene, right? This movie, he's an old man, but he's got action stuff to do, and we're pairing him with a young modern action star, Nick Cage. He was like the action star of the mid to late 90s before maybe Keanu Reeves and some others took over. It was just bridging that gap of like we're bringing in an elderly washed up action hero. We're pairing him with this younger guy, but we're still going to have the elderly guy be the more badass one, which is kind of fun. It's like the opposite of Last Crusade.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot of fun, and they have that mix. It's not all elderly people. It's not the Expendables, where it's just like kind of pathetic and sad, or the Steven Seagal movies. but it's like sad. So I just like that. I think this movie. I don't think there's a single performance in this film that I'm like, oh my god, this is great. But I think the actors do kind of make it in the way, and maybe it's just more than the performances, like the casting. Like, it's just good casting to get all these people, get all these credible actors to play the villains, whether it's Tony Todd or David Morse or John C. McGinley or obviously Ed Harris. I mean, we've got the West Wing's chief of staff as the head of the FBI. Like, that's awesome. So, yeah.
And I guess before we move on, because I don't really have anything else to say about it, I enjoyed this movie a lot. It's one of my favorite action movies.
I don't love this movie nearly as much as you do, but I like it.
Yeah.
I would watch it again. This isn't going to be one of those action movies that I like watch time and time again by any means, but I enjoy it. I do not regret having seen it again. And it's no Face Off, but it's good.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't enjoy this movie. This is a pretty crowd pleasing film, I think.
Oh yeah, it's a crowd pleaser, sure.
But before we move on to our next movie, Patrick, I was just thinking, you were talking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and what I brought up earlier was that Sean Connery won Sexiest Man Alive in 1989, and that was the same year.
Fresh off of that movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Women were watching that movie, and it's like, oh, Harrison Ford, pretty good looking, but that Sean Connery, his dad, man. I mean...
That's always the way it goes, isn't it? The son's attractive,
was
the father's
John Rhys
more
Davies
attractive.
number 2 in that list?
I'd put him up there.
John Rhys Davies is sexier when he's a dwarf, though. Let's be honest.